You know, usually when we talk about human evolution, there's this expectation of just glacial slowness.
Right, like a history textbook.
Exactly. You picture hominids over millions of years, slowly standing up straight, tools gradually getting sharper.
And the evolutionary biologist just points to a fossil in a museum case and says, there it is. That's the leap.
Yeah, and it feels incredibly safe. Mostly because we like to think of our own biology as a finished product. We treat our bodies like we're just currently occupying the final perfected version of the human animal.
Which is a very comforting illusion. I mean,
Yeah.
it assumes the environment around us is relatively stable, or at least changing at a pace our DNA can comfortably keep up with.
But the reality of modern human biology is anything but stable.
It really isn't.
Right, because when you step into the intersection of childhood trauma, neurobiology, and, well, modern technology, that evolutionary timeline is suddenly running on fast forward.
We are looking at a human landscape that is literally mutating in real time.
Yeah. We are rewiring ourselves. And honestly, no one captures this terrifying, beautiful, real-time mutation better than Alan Imbert.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we're doing a complete deep dive into his transdisciplinary corpus, Les Échos du Prisme des Odyssées. And I have to tell you, reading through this, it forces you to completely reevaluate the physical container you're sitting in right now.
It really does.
Imber proposes this core idea that humans are essentially mutants in perpetual mutation. We are constantly being physically and chemically reauthored by our traumas, our food, our digital habits, and like the literal vibrations of the world around us.
And the sheer breadth of what Imbert has accomplished here is just staggering.
Yeah.
We're looking at a text that totally refuses to stay in one lane.
No.
I mean, he manages to bridge the gap between raw, intimate, autobiographical human suffering and high-level applied physics, neurochemistry, and sociological critique.
It's wild. He doesn't just document his pain in a standard memoir format.
No, he uses it as a microscopic lens. He actually mathematically models how the human nervous system interacts with the universe.
So let's just start at the absolute foundation of that nervous system. Imbert describes his entry into the world as being born into an architecture of chaos.
That's a powerful way to phrase it.
The instability preceded his birth. His mother was just 14 and a half years old when she became pregnant with him.
Right.
And she was already deeply entangled in severe addiction to alcohol and narcotics. His father was also incredibly young and came from a completely collapsed family structure.
We aren't just talking about a difficult childhood here. We're talking about a massive, multi-generational collapse.
Exactly. So what does that actually look like on a biological level?
Well, the generational inheritance here is incredibly dense, and it sets the biological stage for everything that follows in his life.
Right.
Consider the paternal lineage for a second. Imbert's grandfather died in prison, hanging himself under circumstances that were, frankly, never fully resolved or explained to the family.
Wow.
And then his paternal grandmother died of diabetes when his father was just 5 years old.
So he's completely orphaned.
Yes. That abrupt loss resulted in his father and his 4 siblings being scattered across various foster care homes. They were systemically uprooted.
And the maternal side is basically a mirror image of that exact instability, isn't it?
It really is. His mother grew up without knowing her own father. She was raised primarily by a grandmother because her own mother was heavily involved in substance abuse and constant, violent relational conflict.
I want to pause here because it's so easy for you listening to this to hear a list of family tragedies and just think, wow, that's sad.
Yeah, people tend to individualize it.
Exactly. But Imber is pointing towards something deeply structural. Like for years, his mother told him his father was a dangerous man. She had to flee.
But the truth he uncovers later is much more complex.
Right. She had actually disappeared for weeks on end, completely lost in massive substance consumption. Everyone was trapped in this web of affective disorganization and multi-generational dependency.
It's just wave after wave of systemic failure. And to really understand the biological weight of this, we have to introduce a crucial clinical framework.
Okay, let's get into it.
It's called ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences.
I've heard of this. This is the Felidian-Onda study, right?
Yes, exactly. A landmark 1998 study involving over 17,000 participants. They wanted to see if there was a correlation between early childhood trauma and later adult health.
And what they found kind of changed everything.
It completely revolutionized public health. They demonstrated a remarkably robust, undeniable dose-response relationship between the number of adverse experiences in childhood.
Things like physical abuse, emotional neglect, a parent with addiction, right?
Yes, all of that, plus household dysfunction. They link that directly to the risk of severe psychiatric and somatic disorders in adulthood.
Okay, a dose-response relationship, meaning it's not just a binary, were you traumatized or not? It's cumulative.
Precisely. The higher the dose of chaos, the higher the biological cost.
So what's the threshold where things get really bad?
If an individual experiences 4 or more ACEs, their risk profile drastically shifts. We're talking about over 60% of individuals with 4 or more early traumatic experiences developing significant psychiatric disorders.
60%. That's massive.
And it comes alongside huge spikes in the risk for heart disease, autoimmune disorders, and even cancer.
So Imbert's family trajectory presents a multi-generational ACE score that is just exceptionally high.
Off the charts, really.
Yeah.
Each generation wasn't just passing down stories of hardship. They were biologically amplifying the trauma.
Which brings us to the actual hardware of the body. Because, it's not just psychological memory, is it? It's literally woven into the DNA expression.
It is. And we have to look at the epigenetic transmission of trauma to understand that.
Okay, break that down for us.
The pioneering work of Rachel Yehuda at Mount Sinai on the descendants of Holocaust survivors is foundational here. She didn't just look at their behavior. She looked at the molecular structure of their genes.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, she studied the methylation of the FKBP5 gene, which is absolutely critical for regulating the body's stress response axis.
Okay, I'm going to need you to explain methylation. How does a grandmother's trauma actually reach a child's DNA?
Think of your DNA as a massive library of blueprints. Just because a blueprint is in the library doesn't mean the body is currently building it.
Okay, that makes sense.
So methylation is this biochemical process where a methyl group, basically a tiny chemical tag, attaches directly to the DNA molecule. It acts like a chemical volume knob.
A volume knob for the gene.
Exactly. If a gene is heavily methylated, the biological machinery can't read it, so the volume is turned all the way down. It's silenced. If the methyl tags are removed, the volume is turned up.
And what did Yehuda find with the trauma survivors?
She found that severe prolonged trauma alters the methylation patterns on the genes responsible for managing cortisol and stress.
Wow.
And here is the kicker. These altered genetic volume knobs, these modified epigenetic tags, are passed down through the germline cells to the children and grandchildren.
Wait, so before Imbert even took his first breath, his genetic expression was already pre-configured for a high-threat environment?
Yes, his biological hardware was modified by the ancestral environment.
His stress response system was basically born already redlining. That is it's devastating.
It's the tragic biological reality. The fetus develops in a biochemical bath of maternal stress hormones, and the genetic tags are set to anticipate a world that is highly dangerous.
Which makes what happened next in his life even more intense. At just 4 months old, Imbert was placed in foster care along with his half-brother.
Right.
Now, conventionally, we view foster care as a stabilizing intervention, like a rescue. But Imbert describes it as a radical, disorienting transformation of his entire representation of the world.
Because we have to consider the developmental window.
Right.
For an infant at 4 months old, the brain is actively building its very first foundational synaptic architectures.
It's mapping things out for the first time.
Literally deciding which neural pathways to pave with myelin to make them permanent and which to prune away.
So when those first connections are formed in a state of sudden environmental shift and underlying permanent threat,
the nervous system becomes oriented entirely around hypervigilance. The brain learns to survive before it ever learns to live.
He talks about learning to navigate this split by calling his biological mother Mamajo and his foster mother Mamaya, and he describes this as a surgical identity operation. He had to hold 2 parallel attachment systems simultaneously.
Which is incredibly taxing on an infant.
One was biological but entirely associated with chaos, unpredictability, and abandonment, and the other was relational and associated with an attempt at safety and order.
This linguistic split is deeply profound for a developing brain. Naming is how a child distributes belonging and maps out reality.
Right.
For a child to navigate 2 contradictory affective realities requires an emotional gymnastics that has massive neurodevelopmental cost.
The brain has to constantly calculate which reality it's currently operating within.
Exactly. And the chronically elevated levels of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, actually modify the physical development of the hippocampus and the amygdala.
It alters the physical mechanisms of emotional regulation and memory.
Precisely.
Wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Mhm.
If a baby's brain is forming its first structures while just marinating in cortisol, trying to figure out which mother is safe today, how does that affect their perception of reality on a random Tuesday when they're 5 years old?
Well, that baseline is forever shifted. You can't just turn off a deeply paved neural pathway.
Right.
And this brings in the second massive variable in Imbert's early life, which complicates the picture exponentially.
His neurodivergence.
Yes. Imbert possessed a profound hypervigilance to textures, sounds, lights, and adult emotional variation.
A screaming adult didn't just cause fear. It felt like a physical, neurological assault to him.
Right. Unexpected changes in a daily routine completely disorganized his entire perception of time and space.
But in that era, and particularly in a precarious family system, this wasn't recognized as autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's.
Not at all. No one was giving him sensory accommodations.
It was just seen as him being difficult, a behavioral anomaly, just another whim from a problematic child in an already overwhelmed system.
Which is an absolute tragedy of systemic ignorance.
Yeah.
What we see here is a synthesis of a double vulnerability.
A double vulnerability.
Yes, you take the natural biological sensory hypervigilance of the autism spectrum, where the brain filters way less environmental data than a neurotypical brain, and you combine it with the trauma-induced hypervigilance of early complex trauma.
It just stacks.
It produces chronic, unremitting sensory saturation. The nervous system becomes this highly tuned, almost paranoid instrument of survival.
It's forced to calculate every single social interaction, every glance, the tone of every voice.
And the weight of every silence, calculating it all as a potential life-ending threat.
He writes that every interaction became a calculation. If you are listening to this right now, try to imagine walking through your normal day. You're going to the grocery store, you're sitting in a meeting.
But your brain is processing the hum of the fluorescent lights and a slight frown from your coworker with the exact same biochemical intensity as a fire alarm going off.
It sounds utterly exhausting.
Beyond exhausting.
And the wild part is, it wasn't just the outside world he had to calculate. It was his own body's internal reaction to the world, which shifts us into how this trauma manifests physically, the literal gut reaction to chaos.
The body and food as a battlefield. It is one of the most immediate arenas where neurobiology clashes with the environment.
Imbert experienced severe, violent physical reactions to a huge list of mundane foods. We're talking nuts, peppers, peas, strawberries, lettuce, mushrooms, tomatoes.
The list was extensive.
He would vomit frequently at kindergarten. The staff got so frustrated they actually asked his foster mother to take him home for lunch because he physically couldn't keep the school food down.
But again, the adults around him didn't see a biological crisis.
No, invisible symptoms are just seen as annoying complications. He was repeatedly told he was being capricious, that he was making it up for attention.
We really need to unpack the psychological damage of that specific adult response. This progressive invalidation of a child's bodily sensations produces a profound psychological effect.
Right, because if you're told your reality isn't real...
Exactly. When a child sees their physical, visceral reality constantly denied and mocked by the adults they depend on for survival, they develop a structural, foundational doubt toward their own perceptions.
They learn not to trust the signals coming from inside their own skin.
Yes. This logic of disqualifying bodily feeling is, as Imbert notes, one of the most insidious forms of symbolic violence. It separates the child from their own physical intuition.
But the reactions weren't in his head. The biology was undeniably real.
Absolutely real, and deeply rooted in the gut-brain axis. We often think of the brain in our skull as the sole command center. But the enteric nervous system, which lines your gastrointestinal tract, is often called the second brain. It contains approximately 500 million neurons.
500 million neurons in your gut.
Yes, and it operates with immense autonomy. It produces about 95% of the body's serotonin and contributes massively to the synthesis of GABA.
And GABA is the main inhibitory calming neurotransmitter in your entire nervous system, right?
Exactly.
I really want to highlight that for you listening. 95% of serotonin, the chemical we constantly associate with mood, happiness, and psychiatric well-being, is produced in the gut, not the brain.
Yes. The communication between your GI tract and your central nervous system is a bidirectional superhighway, primarily mediated by the vagus nerve.
Okay, the vagus nerve.
And contemporary research in psychoneuroimmunology is incredibly clear on this. Food intolerances, intestinal permeability, and severe inflammatory reactions are closely causally linked to states of chronic stress and early childhood trauma.
Let's try an analogy here. The gut of a traumatized, neurodivergent child is basically like an overwhelmed, understaffed processing plant.
I like that.
The body isn't just trying to extract nutrients and digest a strawberry. It's trying to digest the psychic chaos of the foster care system, the sensory overload of the classroom, and the epigenetic trauma of the parents, all at the exact same time.
And the machinery just breaks down.
Right.
That is a highly accurate analogy. A microbiome that has been perturbed by early chronic stress, combined with the sensory hypersensitivity of ASD, creates a documented physiological vulnerability.
It's not a psychological choice to vomit the food.
Not at all. In fact, studies in nutritional psychiatry have demonstrated this vividly with animal models.
Oh, I think I know the study you're talking about.
If you take the gut microbiome, the actual fecal flora of a highly anxious mouse, and you transfer it into a completely healthy, germ-free mouse,
That healthy mouse will begin to exhibit severe anxious behaviors, right?
the flora of the gut literally holds and transmits the anxiety.
So the gut is reacting to the environment. And as he grew older, food became one of the very few territories where he could exert any control.
Which is very common.
Think about it. In a highly unstable, emotionally disorganized family, especially one marked by addiction, where mealtimes are tense, irregular, and dictated by the fluctuating sobriety or emotional state of the adults.
Controlling what goes into your mouth is a desperate survival strategy.
Imbert eventually became a vegetarian, which predictably his family just saw as another oppositional, annoying complication.
In highly dysfunctional family systems, any assertion of autonomy over the body is almost immediately perceived as a threat to the fragile order of the household.
Yeah.
The neuroatypical child inevitably becomes the receptacle for the collective tensions of the adults. Eating, or refusing to eat, becomes one of the only available strategies for emotional regulation and boundary setting.
But what I find so brilliant about Imbert's work is that he doesn't just wallow in his own childhood dietary trauma.
No, he zooms way out.
He takes this intimate understanding of food as a biological trigger and applies it to the macro view of human nutrition in his academic essay.
He traces the entire global food transition.
Right. He starts with the Paleolithic diet, which evolutionary biologists show was incredibly diverse, highly nutrient-dense, and completely devoid of refined sugars,
And then he moves to the Neolithic agricultural revolution.
which gave humanity a massive surplus of calories but drastically reduced dietary diversity.
And then he brings it right up to the modern era, where our guts are facing an entirely new engineered threat.
He's referring to the global saturation of ultra-processed foods, right? UPFs.
Yes, this is a classification system developed by Carlos Monteiro and his team in Brazil, known as the Novier system.
Okay.
UPFs are not just junk food. They are industrial formulations where the original food matrix is completely deconstructed, stripped of natural fiber, and then pumped full of industrial emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, texturizers, and preservatives.
To make them hyper-palatable and extend shelf life indefinitely.
Exactly. It's food engineered in a lab to trick your brain's reward centers.
And in high-income countries right now, UPFs represent anywhere from 50 to 80% of the daily consumed calories for the average person.
We have completely altered the chemical environment of the human gut on a population level.
And Imbert connects this directly to the explosion of mental health crises. I mean, we aren't just getting heavier, we're getting sicker in our minds.
He cites massive epidemiological studies to back this up,
Like the Nutrinet Santé cohort in France,
Yeah.
right?
which shows incredibly robust statistical links between ultra-processed diets and depressive and anxiety disorders.
The modern food industry is actively altering the human microbiome, which means it is directly altering human brain chemistry.
But Imbert is careful not to frame this as an individual moral failure, which raises a vital sociological point. We have to view nutrition through the lens of socioeconomics.
Right, it's not just about choosing to eat better.
No, he leans on the concept of the scarcity mindset. This is a psychological framework conceptualized by behavioral economists Senhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir.
I've read a bit about this.
Their research demonstrates that when people live in poverty or chronic financial insecurity, their cognitive bandwidth is constantly hijacked by immediate survival calculations.
How do I pay rent? How do I keep the electricity on? How do I avoid this debt collector?
Exactly. If your brain is using all its RAM just to survive the week, you don't have the cognitive space to plan a meticulous, organic, gut-healing meal prep for the family.
You grab the cheapest, fastest, most calorie-dense thing on the shelf.
Yes. So poor nutrition is fundamentally a structural inequality. The global capitalist food system actively produces biological inequalities.
The most economically vulnerable populations are disproportionately exposed to cheap, inflammatory diets.
And these diets perturb the microbiome, upregulate systemic inflammation, and literally alter the neurochemistry required for emotional regulation and cognitive focus.
And the real tragedy is, these biological environment-induced deficits are then routinely mislabeled by society as individual behavioral problems, lack of discipline, or academic learning difficulties in children.
Which is the perfect bridge into how society processes those children.
Because if you take a child with a trauma-altered microbiome, a chronically inflamed gut, an epigenetically hypervigilant stress response, and a neurodivergent Asperger's brain,
And you drop them into a traditional fluorescent-lit, loud, rigid school environment.
you are building a factory of exclusion.
For Imbert, the educational system was not a place of learning. It was an environment of permanent, inescapable threat. He was bullied relentlessly.
He was targeted precisely for his vulnerabilities, his sensory sensitivity, his atypical hyper-focused interests, his specific manner of speaking.
He writes that the bullying wasn't just a series of isolated bad episodes that he could shake off. It was the permanent backdrop of his existence.
His physical body learned that collective human spaces were inherently places of danger.
We really need to break down the neurobiology of school harassment to understand why it's so devastating.
Please do.
For a child with an already traumatized nervous system, simply crossing the physical threshold of a classroom or a cafeteria triggers a massive physiological cascade.
The amygdala detects a threat.
Yes. The heart rate accelerates, the muscles involuntarily contract. The child might experience derealization or dissociation just to cope with the sensory input.
So what happens to their ability to learn?
The vital cognitive resources, the working memory and executive function in the prefrontal cortex that a neurotypical child uses to learn algebra, conjugate verbs, or analyze history are, for the traumatized child, entirely hijacked for survival.
They are just scanning the room for the predator.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, but this is where I get so frustrated with the standard educational model. You can't possibly expect a child to focus on a math worksheet if their brain chemistry genuinely believes there is a tiger in the room.
You really can't.
Or in this case, a bully who is going to psychologically or physically humiliate them the exact second the teacher turns their back to write on the chalkboard.
It is a biological impossibility to prioritize higher-order learning when the organism is in survival mode. And here, Imbert brilliantly applies the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of symbolic violence.
Right, the system itself is the violence.
The traditional school system operates on a fundamental hypocrisy. It treats children who are radically unequal in their neurological architectures, their developmental trauma histories, and their inherited sociocultural capital as if they were exactly the same.
The system assumes a baseline of a neurotypical brain from a stable middle-class home.
Yes, it implicitly values linear thinking, conventional verbal processing, and strict behavioral compliance.
So when an autistic child who naturally thinks in complex systems and vivid imagery and in nonlinear connections enters that system, they are evaluated by standardized tools designed for a completely different type of brain.
The evaluation process itself becomes the symbolic violence. The institution formally and structurally delegitimizes the child's natural form of intelligence.
So what happens to the psychology of that child if every test, every teacher interaction, every social dynamic tells them they are failing? Do they just accept that they are the broken cog in the machine?
Almost universally, yes. The child internalizes their own perceived inadequacy. They view it as a personal, inherent deficit rather than a catastrophic institutional failure.
They learn to perceive themselves as fundamentally flawed.
And this psychological collapse is actively compounded by the institution through what is known as the Pygmalion effect.
Oh, I know this one. Psychologist Robert Rosenthal's work from 1968. It's the science of self-fulfilling prophecies.
Exactly. Rosenthal showed that a teacher's expectations unconsciously but directly shape a student's actual outcomes.
Right.
If a teacher looks at a marginalized, traumatized, or neuroatypical child and categorizes them as problematic, lazy, or incapable, that teacher's behavior shifts.
Even if they don't mean to.
Right. They subconsciously offer less positive reinforcement. They wait less time for the student to answer a question. Their micro-expressions convey disappointment, and they offer less stimulating academic challenges.
And a hypervigilant autistic kid is going to read every single one of those micro expressions as a massive rejection.
Precisely. The child's amygdala processes the teacher's sigh, or lack of eye contact, as a threat, increasing their anxiety and further degrading their academic performance.
The institution essentially conceptualizes the child as a failure long before they actually fail. The system creates the exact failure it anticipates.
Imbert even references PISA studies to back this up on a macro level. He notes that France is actually one of the OECD countries where the correlation between socioeconomic origin and school performance is among the absolute highest.
The school system doesn't act as a great equalizer.
No, it rarely compensates for origin inequalities. More often than not, it rigorously amplifies them, sorting children into winners and losers based on the invisible capital they brought with them on the first day.
When institutions fail this spectacularly to recognize and accommodate neurodivergence and trauma, they don't just produce students with bad grades, they produce a specific sociological phenomenon.
Yes, what Imbert refers to as errance, a profound wandering, a drifting into marginality.
Which is exactly the path Imbert was forced onto. He dropped out of the conventional linear path. He left the factory, so to speak.
He turned to the night, to transient lifestyles, to random encounters, and endless travel.
And the incredible irony here is that this wandering, this social exile, actually provided a significantly better learning environment for an Asperger's brain.
It did. It stripped away the rigid linear curriculum and allowed for deep, unstructured, systemic observation of the real world.
He became an anthropologist of the streets. But that comes at an incredibly high social, physical, and economic risk.
The risk is total, but it was precisely during these years of raw, unprotected wandering that Imbert began to formulate his own phenomenological and scientific theories.
He was no longer trying to fit his brain into a standardized test.
He stopped seeing the world as just a static material backdrop and started perceiving it as a highly complex, dynamic system of visible and invisible energetic interactions.
And this transition brings us to one of the most fascinating parts of his work, the physics of presence and the theory of energy.
Yes.
This is where Imbert's hypersystematizing, pattern-seeking Asperger's brain really starts to map the invisible architecture of human interaction. During his wandering, he developed a theory based on charge, recharge, and discharge.
He began observing human individuals not just as psychological beings, but as dynamic, energetic, and thermodynamic systems.
He noticed that certain human presences acted as regulators for his nervous system.
Being near them provided a sense of cognitive expansion, grounding, and emotional calm, a recharge.
Conversely, other presences literally drained his biological battery. Interacting with them caused immediate dissociation, profound neurological fatigue, and severe sensory saturation, a rapid discharge. Now, on a colloquial level, I think every single person listening to this can relate. We've all been around that one person who just seemingly sucks the energy out of a room.
Or conversely, a friend who makes you feel instantly calm just by sitting next to you.
Exactly. But Imbel didn't just leave it at a vibe. He grounded this intuition in empirical observation.
Because it is grounded in documented biological mechanisms. Western science often treats the human brain and body as a closed, isolated system inside a bag of skin.
But we aren't. We are deeply biologically relational.
We are permeable. If we look at the work of Elaine Hatfield, John Carriapo, and Richard Rapson on emotional contagion, they demonstrate that humans biologically and neurologically mirror the states of those around them.
Inter-individual neural synchronization is a measurable, fMRI-verified phenomenon.
When two people talk and connect, their brainwaves literally begin to align.
And it's not just the brain, it's the heart, too.
Absolutely. The field of neurocardiology has shown that the human heart generates a measurable electromagnetic field that extends several feet outward from the physical body.
It is vastly stronger than the brain's electromagnetic field.
When people interact in close proximity, their cardiac rhythms and electromagnetic fields can actually interact and synchronize.
So Imbert's intuition about energetic charge and discharge isn't New Age mysticism. It is built on a solid foundation of biophysics.
Our bodies are constantly, invisibly permeable to the electromagnetic, hormonal, and neurochemical states of the people in our immediate environment.
But then, during this intense period of wandering and heightened observation, Imbert starts experiencing things that push the boundaries of what we collectively consider a stable consensus reality.
He starts detecting anomalies.
Glitches in the matrix of time and space. And to talk about this, we have to talk about Morgaine.
The episode with Morgaine is a truly fascinating case study in perceptive anomalies, and it challenges our fundamental assumptions about linear time.
I honestly couldn't stop thinking about this story. It reads like a psychological thriller.
It really does.
So if you're listening, picture this. Imbert is going through a phase of intense wandering, living a very transient lifestyle where conventional social time, like the 9 to 5 clock, has completely lost its meaning.
Days and nights blur together.
He meets Morgaine, a young woman who possesses a very dense, intense, erratic energy and who showed clear behavioral signs of being on the schizophrenic spectrum.
Right.
They're walking together in the city of Montpellier in the south of France. It's a summer evening. They are heading to take a shower at his mother's place in a nearby town called Vendargue.
Imbert knows this specific walking route perfectly. He's walked it countless times.
They've been walking forward for about 15 minutes. He's asking her deep, almost hypnotic questions about her childhood, really probing her psychology. And suddenly, right in the middle of a thought, she violently interrupts him and says a very abrupt, vulgar phrase in French, which basically translates to, "Damn, my crotch itches."
It is a highly abrupt, visceral, sensory disruption that completely breaks the rhythm of a deep intellectual conversation.
Yes. So she physically scratches herself, and Imbert, startled by the outburst, looks down at the ground. He sees a very specific metal circular manhole cover right under his feet. He checks his watch. It is exactly 9:000 p.m.
He notes the environment. Behind her is a specific speed bump, a street sign, a familiar curve in the asphalt.
The moment passes, they keep walking. They absolutely do not turn around. They maintain a steady, forward walking pace. 40 minutes go by.
He's asking more questions, getting deep into the psychological conversation again.
And out of nowhere, she interrupts him with the exact same intonation, the exact same phrase, "Damn, my crotch itches."
The exact same linguistic and physical trigger, occurring after 40 minutes of linear forward movement.
Right, and Imbert feels this violent physical shock of déjà vu hit his nervous system. He checks his watch. It's 9:21 p.m.
He looks down at his feet.
It is the exact same metal manhole cover. He looks around. The exact same speed bump, the exact same street sign, the exact same angle of the streetlights.
They have somehow looped back to the exact physical space, despite walking straight forward.
Terrified, they just keep walking forward. And then it happens a third time. She says the exact same phrase. He checks his watch. It's 9:47 p.m. They are standing on the exact same manhole cover.
Two entirely distinct temporal sequences. One of 21 minutes, one of 26 minutes, simply vanished from reality. The space-time continuum literally stuttered.
So how do you even begin to explain that?
From a strict clinical and neurological perspective, we have a few frameworks to analyze an event like this.
Okay.
We're observing two individuals who are existing in a state of severe, chronic neurological fatigue, living transient, highly stressed lifestyles outside of normal circadian rhythms.
So their brains are already pushed to the limit.
Yes. We know that severe dissociative states, often triggered by trauma or sheer exhaustion, can profoundly alter the brain's encoding of memory and its perception of time. Furthermore, the hypersensitivity of the Asperger's brain is naturally designed to rigorously detect environmental patterns and anomalies. But when that brain becomes completely saturated by exhaustion and intense social interaction, it can experience a severe desynchronization of subjective temporality.
The brain basically misfiles the present moment as a past memory, creating a terrifying loop. I hear the clinical explanation. But for Imbert, who was entirely sober and hyperlucid at the time, he felt an absolute existential terror. He said his eyes watered like a frightened child.
Right, because it shook his foundation.
This wasn't just a brain glitch to him, something fundamentally fractured in his trust toward the stability of reality itself.
And we must deeply respect Imbert's philosophical conclusion here, because reducing it merely to a neurological misfire ignores the profound impact of the experience.
Yeah, you can't just dismiss it.
While clinical psychiatry offers a mechanical explanation, the raw, visceral, emotional intensity of the event gives it a profound existential weight. For Imbert, it suggested that the physical cosmos is far more unstable, far more fluid, and far more responsive to consciousness than our rigid Newtonian human structures generally admit.
And it wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't the only time the physical world seemed to dynamically respond to an intense, energetic state. There's also the story of Linda and the light bulb, which is just as eerie.
Yes, the interaction with his foster sister.
Right, so years later, they are sitting face to face in her small studio apartment. They are engaged in an incredibly intense, emotionally charged conversation about their shared past, their traumas, the energetic weights they carry.
And the light bulb directly above Linda starts to act strangely.
But it's not just randomly flickering like a bad connection, it's breathing. It dims and brightens in direct rhythmic response to the cadence and intensity of their conversation.
They both stop and notice it.
It goes on for several minutes, this undeniable synchronization between human emotion and electricity. And finally, Imbert looks at it, looks at Linda, and asks aloud, "Do you think this is a manifestation?"
And the exact millisecond he finishes the sentence, the bulb doesn't just quietly burn out.
It clicks off with a loud, crisp, definitive sound, like a punctuation mark, like a response.
It is a remarkable synchronicity. The amygdala, which is the brain's primary fear and emotional processing center, massively reinforces memory consolidation during highly novel, emotionally charged, or seemingly threatening events.
Which is why both Imbert and Linda remember the micro details of this scene with exact, terrifying precision 15 years later.
But Imbert uses these experiences to hypothesize something much larger about electromagnetic signatures.
What does he theorize?
If our hearts and brains produce measurable electromagnetic fields, and if two brains in a small room are highly focused, emotionally charged, and synchronized, could that localized co-regulation of energy actually interact with the ambient physical environment?
Could the human biofield disrupt a fragile electrical circuit? It attempts to bridge the gap between human biology and quantum physics, and ultimately, exploring these anomalies brings him to a deeply stabilizing, almost beautiful cosmology. He reasons that if energy just transfers, if we are quite literally made of atoms that used to be forged in the hearts of collapsing stars, then death and loss are just a redistribution of energy.
An energetic imprint always remains in the system.
For a guy whose entire life has been defined by extreme instability, abandonment, and loss, realizing that the universe itself is an interconnected web of persistent, indestructible energy gave him a framework to survive.
We are matter that used to be stars. It is a beautiful, scientifically accurate synthesis that provides immense existential comfort. However, as Imbert sharply points out, this physical, energetic environment we inhabit, the one our biology has adapted to over millions of years, is currently undergoing a massive, artificial, and incredibly rapid shift.
Exactly, because if our physical environments and intimate human interactions shape our biology so profoundly, if an intense conversation can make a light bulb flicker or make us feel physically drained, what happens when we take billions of those human interactions, strip them of their physical context, and move them entirely into the digital realm?
This brings us to a massive sociological pivot in his work, the digital mutation.
Imbert's essay views the advent of social media and the smartphone not just as a convenient new tool for communication.
He sees it as an anthropological mutation, comparable in scale to the invention of the printing press, the agricultural revolution, or the industrial revolution.
But it's happening infinitely faster. We now have a digital ecosystem inhabited by over 5 billion human users, interacting constantly.
And it is completely, radically rewiring human identity.
I think about the sociologist Irving Goffman, who wrote about the presentation of self in everyday life back in 1959. He talked about how we perform our identities for others, but social media puts Goffman's theories on absolute steroids.
We are constantly curating these hyper-edited, perfect images of ourselves.
But the pressure of living under that relentless 247 digital gaze is literally crushing people's mental health.
Because we have to remember that these digital platforms are not neutral public squares.
Yeah.
They are highly engineered environments.
The dopamine reward loops, the variable reinforcement of likes, the red notification badges, the infinite scroll mechanism.
They were intentionally designed by Silicon Valley engineers. They explicitly utilize the exact same behavioral psychology that casinos use to make slot machines addictive.
The platform exploits our deep evolutionary need for social validation and tribal belonging, turning it into a compulsive behavioral loop.
And the psychological cost is just massive. Imbert heavily cites the research of psychologist Jean Twenge.
Right. She has documented the unprecedented massive spike in anxiety, depression, and self-harm, particularly among adolescents, tied directly to the widespread adoption of the smartphone around 2012.
It's driven by what psychologists call upward social comparison.
You are constantly, obsessively comparing your own messy, unfiltered, behind-the-scenes reality to the algorithmically optimized highlight reels of billionaires, models, and influencers.
This fuels an epidemic of FOMO, the fear of missing out, And paradoxically, this state of hyperconnection generates a profound structural sense of interior loneliness and inadequacy.
But what is often overlooked in these sociological discussions, and what Imbert details meticulously, are the direct physiological and biomechanical impacts of this technology.
Yes. If you are listening to this on a smartphone right now, take a second to think about your posture. Check your neck. You are probably hunched over, looking down.
Imbert is arguing that this isn't just a bad habit, it is in our bodies. The blue light emitted from the screens actively inhibits the pineal gland's secretion of melatonin, totally wrecking our circadian rhythms, degrading our sleep quality, and therefore our cognitive recovery.
And then there's the physical skeleton. He specifically points to text-neck, or clinical cervicalgia.
We are seeing a significant population-wide rise in postural pathologies.
Changes in the curvature of the cervical spine, simply because of the biomechanical angle at which we hunch over these devices for 6 to 10 hours a day. We are physically mutating our bone structure to accommodate the device.
Furthermore, the algorithmic amplification of heavily filtered, mathematically impossible body ideals is directly, causally contributing to the global rise of eating disorders and body dysmorphia.
So the digital mutation is a biological mutation.
And if we zoom out to a macroeconomic scale, Imbert brings in Shoshana Zuboff's brilliant and terrifying concept of surveillance capitalism.
This is the core economic engine driving the mutation. The platforms offer us seemingly free services, free email, free networking, free photo sharing, and an asymmetric, hidden trade for incredibly valuable behavioral data.
Every pause in your scroll, every click, the exact milliseconds you linger on an image, your location data, it is all relentlessly harvested.
It constitutes what Zuboff calls a behavioral surplus, which is analyzed by machine learning and sold to advertisers to predict and, more importantly, influence your future behavior.
You are not the customer. Your predictable behavior is the product.
And to keep you engaged so they can harvest more data, the algorithms are designed to feed you content that triggers high arousal emotions, usually outrage, and content that reinforces what you already believe.
This leads to what Eli Pariser famously calls filter bubbles or echo chambers.
Which has devastating, quantifiable political consequences. By feeding users only information that confirms their existing biases, the algorithms drive extreme political polarization and the rapid demonization of opposing viewpoints.
We saw this culminate globally during the COVID-19 pandemic with what the World Health Organization officially designated as an infodemic.
The viral algorithmic spread of misinformation that became a standalone lethal public health threat.
It fundamentally erodes epistemic trust. If a society can't agree on a shared baseline of basic facts, how does a democratic system even function?
It really struggles.
Now, we have to make sure we look at the whole picture here. We aren't taking sides on any political spectrum. We are just conveying Imbert's analysis. Imbert notes that this technology is a double-edged sword. It's not universally evil.
It has massively democratized access to knowledge.
You can learn quantum physics, how to code, or how to fix a broken sink entirely for free on YouTube. Marginalized communities, people with rare diseases, LGBTQ youth in isolated towns, they can find immediate solidarity, support, and visibility that traditional localized society completely denied them.
It is a profound paradox. The technology connects us globally while simultaneously alienating us locally. It provides infinite information while actively degrading our neurological capacity for deep, sustained critical reading and thinking.
The digital environment is fundamentally a high-stress, high-saturation, hyper-stimulating environment.
Which makes Imbert's final major pivot in this corpus so incredibly powerful.
Yes, he didn't just document the epigenetic trauma of his childhood, he didn't just mount the failures of the French school system, and he didn't just critique the toxicity of the digital age.
He took his hyper-systematizing, pattern-seeking Asperger's brain and turned it entirely toward understanding the mechanics of healing.
He actively sought out the antidotes to this modern hypersaturation.
This is where Imbert's transdisciplinary genius truly shines, and where the work becomes profoundly hopeful. He moves into the biophysics of healing.
He doesn't look at alternative or ancient therapies as magic, placebo, or mysticism. He looks at them strictly as applied physics and neurochemistry.
He created these incredibly rigorous, mathematically backed scientific models for practices that usually get dismissed by the Western medical establishment as New Age.
He looked at karasansui, which are traditional Japanese dry rock gardens. He looked at harmonic sound therapy, light therapy, and touch therapies, specifically Reiki and ancient hand postures called mudras.
And instead of just saying they make you feel relaxed, he asked what is actually physically happening to the cellular structure of the body.
Through intense research, he discovered a unified biological mechanism.
He posits that whether you are silently gazing at the carefully raked gravel of a Zen garden in Kyoto, or listening to the specific resonant frequencies of a Tibetan singing bowl, or receiving the static, light touch of a Reiki practitioner, the human body's neurobiological response pathway is nearly identical.
Okay, I need you to walk us through the biology of this, because on the surface, looking at a rock garden and getting a light touch massage seem like completely different activities. How are they doing the exact same thing to my brain?
It begins with a sensory input activating specific nerve fibers. In the case of light touch like Reiki, it activates the C-tactile afferents in the skin.
Right.
In the case of the Zen garden or sound therapy, it modulates the visual and auditory cortexes. But all of these sensory inputs project their calming signals down to a specific relay station in the brainstem called the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, or the NTS.
Okay, the NTS, the master relay station.
Exactly. Activating the NTS instantly increases what we call vagal tone. This is the activity of the vagus nerve, which wanders from your brainstem down through all your major organs.
The vagus nerve is the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode.
This sudden increase in vagal tone sends a powerful inhibitory signal directly to the hypothalamus in the brain.
Basically telling the brain's alarm system to finally shut down the stress response.
Yes. It chemically inhibits the release of CRH, or corticotropin-releasing hormone. Without CRH, the pituitary gland stops releasing ACTH, and consequently, the adrenal gland sitting on top of your kidneys stop pumping out cortisol.
The cascade of chronic stress is abruptly halted at the source.
And Imber doesn't just casually say your cortisol drops. He actually provides the mathematical equation for how the stress hormone clears out of the bloodstream.
He models the clearance of cortisol using a pharmacokinetic equation, right?
He states that the concentration follows an exponential decay model.
Okay, hold on. For those of you listening right now who haven't taken calculus in a decade, you have to translate that. What does that math actually mean for my body?
Think of your accumulated stress, your cortisol, like a bathtub filled to the brim with dirty water. When you trigger that vagus nerve through deep stillness or sound, you aren't just scooping water out slowly with a teacup. You are pulling the plug at the bottom of the tub. The math Imbert uses shows an exponential drop.
So it's not a slow leak, it's a flush.
Exactly. The starting concentration is your high stress when you walk in. The end concentration is the calm baseline you want to reach. The constant in the equation represents how wide that drain is open, which is controlled by your vagal tone.
Because it's an exponential equation, it means that the calmer you get, the faster the remaining stress drains out of your blood. It cascades, it builds on itself mathematically.
So the body has a built-in, mathematically perfect drain for trauma if we just know how to open it.
That is beautiful. But he goes even deeper than hormones, right? He goes down to the literal electrical charge at the cells.
He traces it down to the cellular ion channels. The activation of those C-tactile afferents by a mudra or Reiki touch, or the harmonic resonance of sound, also triggers the brain to release oxytocin and beta endorphins.
Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and endorphins, the body's natural painkillers.
Yes. The oxytocin plays a vital mechanical role. It helps restore the function of the sodium-potassium pump on the cell membrane. This pump is responsible for maintaining the electrical charge of every single cell in your body.
And chronic, unrelenting stress literally breaks this pump, right?
It does, making your nerve cells hyperexcitable, which means they fire pain and panic signals too easily. Oxytocin physically fixes the pump.
And what do the endorphins do in this model?
The beta endorphins bind to specific opiate receptors that force open specific potassium channels. When these molecular channels open wide, positive potassium ions rush out of the cell.
This causes a state of hyperpolarization.
The cell's internal electrical charge drops so low, becomes so negative, that it literally lacks the electrical voltage required to fire an action potential.
Therefore, the transmission of pain signals is chemically and electrically blocked before it can even travel up the spinal cord to the brain.
That is absolutely incredible. So the gentle touch of a mudra, or the vibration of a sound bath, isn't just soothing your mind. It is acting as a biochemical key that literally locks down the electrical pain channels in your nervous system.
But Imbert's transdisciplinary mind goes even further. He steps out of biology entirely and applies the physics of sand to human flesh.
The application of the physics of granular media to human tissue. This is arguably his most avant-garde, brilliant modeling.
Okay, I'm going to need you to slow way down here. How does a physics equation designed for wet sand apply to my shoulder muscles?
You have to look at the fascia. Fascia is the continuous three-dimensional web of connective tissue, mostly collagen, that wraps every single muscle, bone, nerve, and organ in your body. It's what gives you shape.
Okay, the connective tissue web.
Imbert suggests that because of its dense, fibrous structure, we can mathematically model this fascial network as a dense, amorphous, granular medium. Imagine a highly compressed bag of wet sand.
Okay, I have the image.
In physics, the structural behavior of granular media under stress is governed by something called the mu-I rheology law. The master variable in this law is the inertial number, denoted by the letter I.
This number describes the ratio between the macroscopic shear forces acting on the material like physical movement, mechanical stress, or trauma, and the microscopic confining forces holding it together.
So if I'm highly stressed, running around, my posture is terrible from looking at my phone, my fascia is tight, and that inertial number is high.
Yes, the sand of your tissue is rigid, compressed, and holding kinetic energy. But when you achieve a state of perfect intentional stillness, like holding a specific mudra posture, or receiving a static, motionless Reiki touch, or standing perfectly still while observing the geometry of a Karasensu garden, the macroscopic shear forces drop to zero.
Therefore, the inertial number approaches zero.
The inertial number approaches zero. And what exactly happens in the physics of granular materials when that hits zero?
You trigger what physicists call a jamming transition or a glass phase transition. The material suddenly, instantaneously shifts its physical state.
In the context of the human body, when the fascia reaches this exact transition point through perfect resonant stillness, the collagen network undergoes a phase shift.
It instantly releases the residual mechanical tension it has been holding on to for years. The chronic myofascial contractors, the physical armor of trauma, just melt.
So it's not that you are consciously trying to relax your muscles. It's like a massive traffic jam where suddenly, magically, all the cars are perfectly aligned and the gridlock just dissipates instantly.
Yes, it is a profound structural reset of the body achieved not through stretching or force, but through absolute mathematical stillness.
And he doesn't stop with solid matter. He tackles fluid dynamics as well. How do sound waves and light therapies move the water inside us?
The human body is fundamentally a fluid system. We are mostly water, and much of that is interstitial fluid moving through the porous, sponge-like matrix of our tissues.
Imbert models this fluid movement using a complex equation known as the extended Darcy-Brinkman equation.
Let's unpack the Darcy-Brinkman equation in a way we can all visualize. Normally, fluid moves through your body's tissues due to pressure gradients, your heart pumping, and temperature differences.
But Imbert introduces a source term into the equation. This variable represents the external mechanical force of acoustic sound waves, or the thermal and photonic energy of light.
He demonstrates mathematically that harmonic sound and coherent light act as microscopic hydrodynamic pumps. The vibration literally pushes the interstitial fluid through the dense fascia, optimizing lymphatic drainage, removing cellular waste, and increasing oxygenation.
Sound is literally pumping the fluid through the sponge of your body. But it's not just normal tap water inside us, right? Imbert talks heavily about easy water.
Exclusion zone water. This is a groundbreaking biological concept popularized by bioengineer Gerald Pollack. When water touches hydrophilic, or water-loving surfaces inside the body, like the collagen proteins in our fascia, it doesn't act like liquid water.
It structures itself into a highly ordered liquid crystalline phase. The chemical formula actually shifts to form a dense exclusion zone that separates electrical charges, acting exactly like a biological battery.
And how do therapies like sound and light interact with this biological battery?
The mechanical kinetic energy from sound frequencies and the photonic energy from light significantly expand the size of this exclusion zone.
When the EZ expands, it creates a highly conductive superhighway for protons to travel incredibly fast through the tissue. In biochemistry, this is known as the Grothus mechanism.
The Grothus mechanism. Instead of a single proton slowly swimming through fluid, protons hop rapidly from one structured water molecule to the next at lightning speed.
By expanding the EZ water, sound and light therapies literally turn the human fascial network into a highly efficient, high-speed bioelectric semiconductor.
Furthermore, the deep biological relaxation this induces stabilizes the mitochondria in your cells. This reduces oxidative stress, which normalizes the emission of ultra-weak biophotons from our cells.
Wait, biophotons, are you saying we emit light?
Yes, all living cells emit ultra-weak traces of light. When we are sick or highly stressed, that light emission is chaotic and elevated due to free radical damage.
When the mitochondria are stabilized through these therapies, we literally glow with a more coherent, stable light.
We glow with a more stable light. That is immensely poetic, but it's grounded in hardcore peer-reviewed biophysics. And what I absolutely love most about Imbert's conclusion here is the radical universality of it.
Think about traditional interventions for trauma. Conventional talk therapy or navigating the specialized educational system, they require intense cognitive participation, they require advanced language skills, and they almost always require a certain level of socioeconomic privilege to access.
But these biophysical modalities, they require zero active cognitive participation.
They represent absolute systemic inclusivity. You don't need a high income, you don't need physical mobility, you don't need a neurotypical cognitive framing to benefit from the biophysics of a sound bath, sunlight, or a Reiki mudra.
Your body's physics do the work regardless of your psychological state or your social class. Invert points at something so beautiful here, that ancient cultural concepts, like qi in Chinese medicine, qi in Japanese tradition, or qi, the ideas of vital energy and breath are simply early, highly accurate cultural translations of this exact biophysics.
Qi is just the ancient language for the dynamic flow of ionic depolarization and interstitial microfluids. C is the geometric propagation of acoustic waves through tissue.
It's the exact same truth, the exact same physics, viewed through different cultural lenses over millennia.
It is the ultimate transdisciplinary synthesis. He has successfully unified ancient human intuition with modern, rigorous differential equations.
So what does this all mean for us today? Let's bring this massive roadmap back together.
Alan Imbert's life and his staggering body of work prove that human suffering, whether it's inherited epigenetically from a chaotic, addicted, multi-generational family, whether it's inflicted by a rigid, violently standardized educational system that punishes neurodivergence, or whether it's being actively generated by the algorithmic dopamine loops of modern surveillance capitalism, that suffering is not just in our heads.
It leaves a dense physical, biological imprint on our genetic expression, our gut microbiome, and the literal tension of our fascial network.
But the profound radical optimism of les échos du prisme, as you say, is that the universe has also provided the precise built-in biophysical mechanisms to rewrite that imprint.
We are mutants, yes, but we can direct the mutation. Through the harmonic, intentional application of sound, light, touch, and absolute physical stillness, the human body can undergo literal phase transitions that release the trapped kinetic energy of trauma.
As Imbert powerfully concludes in his text, the highest form of resilience isn't returning to who you were before, it's becoming someone that only the ordeal could have created.
Becoming someone that only the ordeal could have created. That reframes everything. The trauma, the mutation, doesn't have to be purely destructive. If processed through the right biophysics, it can be an evolution toward a much deeper, more resonant understanding of the world.
Exactly. The human being is not a static object condemned forever by their genetic past or their toxic environment, because the environment can be consciously chosen, altered, and transformed to induce deep systemic healing.
We hold the physics of our own liberation.
We really do.
Which leaves me with one final lingering thought. A question that builds on all of this physics and sociology. Something for you, listening right now, to chew on as you go back into the noise of your day.
Let's hear it.
We've established that our individual bodies, our fascia, and our nervous systems can undergo a jamming transition, a physical structural release of deep trauma,
Right.
just by reaching a state of perfect resonant stillness.
Right.
If the micro reflects the macro, what would happen if our hyper-connected, socially mediated, ultra-processed, permanently exhausted modern society did the exact same thing? What if the whole global system simply stopped and allowed itself a collective moment of profound, inactive biophysical silence? Would the world finally heal its own trauma?